All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving into pretty murky waters, the
Yeah.
world of undocumented students and how they're navigating higher education in the U.S.,
Hmm.
especially now with Trump back in office.
Yeah.
You listening right now probably want to know what kind of challenges they're facing
Right.
and how universities are trying to help them out.
Exactly.
So to help us get a grip on all this,
Yeah.
we've got excerpts from this Inside Higher Ed article.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Trump Threatens Deportations, Campus Leaders Tread Carefully.
That's a heavy one.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And it's pretty wild to think about, like, there are roughly 400,000
Wow.
undocumented students just trying to, go to college and live their lives.
Yeah.
But they're in this really tough spot, right?
For sure.
They're scared about what might happen with, immigration stuff.
Hmm.
And then you have the universities who want to protect them.
Right. Right.
But they also have to be super careful about the legal and political side of things.
It's a tightrope walk, that's for sure. It's interesting you bring up that comparison to 2016
Yeah.
because back then, a lot of university presidents, they were really quick to come out
Yeah.
and publicly support their undocumented students. Some even directly challenged Trump's policy.
Yeah, they were pretty vocal about it.
Totally. But this time around,
It's been much quieter.
it's way more muted. Why do you think that is?
Well, the article kind of hints at it.
Yeah.
Universities don't want to become political targets again. Think about what happened
Absolutely.
with those pro-Palestinian protests.
Oh, yeah.
There were investigations.
Right.
People resigned.
They're probably thinking twice about getting in the middle of all that again.
Right, exactly. And they've got a lot on the line, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
Federal funding,
Big time.
public image.
Huge.
Yeah, if they just straight up defy the administration's stance on immigration,
Right.
they could lose it all.
It's a really delicate balance they got to strike.
It's a tough spot for those university leaders.
No doubt.
On one hand, you've got all these students who are terrified.
Yeah.
Many of them brought here as kids who are worried about being deported.
Right.
And, of course, they want to support them. But on the other hand,
And I got to protect the university itself.
exactly. It's almost like they're being pulled in two different directions.
Totally. But even though we're not seeing those big public statements,
Right.
things aren't exactly quiet behind the scenes,
Oh, really?
Yeah, the article mentioned that over 1,300 people
Wow.
went to this briefing on how to support undocumented students. It was hosted by the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration.
So they're preparing, even if they're not, making a big show of it.
Exactly. There's a real sense of urgency, even if it's not so visible.
Okay, so what's driving all this urgency?
You got to look at what happened during Trump's first term,
Right.
like his attempts to dismantle DACA, for instance.
Right. That created a ton of uncertainty for those students.
Oh, yeah. And then there's the Heritage Foundation. They're a pretty influential conservative think tank.
Okay.
And they've recommended cutting off federal financial aid to universities that offer in-state tuition to undocumented students.
Wow. That's a big deal.
Huge. So basically, universities are worried that all the support they've been giving could just vanish overnight.
Oh, I see. So they're like scrambling to figure out what to do if that happens.
Exactly.
And it's not just theoretical either.
No, not at all.
Like the article mentioned that Texas is trying to pass a law to stop undocumented students from getting in-state tuition.
Yeah, and if that goes through,
Who knows how many other states will follow suit?
it's a very unstable situation for everyone involved, both the students and the universities.
For sure. And it's not just talk, is it? Like they're actually taking concrete steps to prepare.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A lot of universities now have whole legal teams just focused on immigration issues.
Really.
Yeah, that was practically unheard of back in 2016.
It's like they're preparing for a legal battle.
You could say that. But, amidst all this uncertainty,
Mm.
the article does highlight some really hopeful things, too,
Oh, good. Like what?
like specific examples of universities going above and beyond to help their undocumented students.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, like Trinity Washington University, for example.
Okay.
They're doing a ton of stuff, partnering with legal clinics to make sure students get the best advice.
That's great.
Yeah, staying on top of all the available resources
Mm.
and even talking directly to the students to figure out exactly what they need. It's a really proactive approach.
That's encouraging to hear.
Yeah,
But realistically, there are limits to what universities can do.
of course. Yeah.
Legally speaking, they can't just ignore federal immigration enforcement.
That's a key point. It's a very, very delicate balance.
It is.
They can advocate for their students, guide them toward legal resources, and fight back against policies that are harmful.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they can't obstruct federal law enforcement. It's all about finding that sweet spot between supporting students and staying within the legal boundaries.
It's a tough spot to be in. This whole thing reminds me of the sanctuary campus movement back in 2016.
Yeah.
A lot of students were really pushing their universities to declare themselves as safe havens.
Mm-hmm.
Places where undocumented students wouldn't have to worry about ICE.
Right, refusing to cooperate with federal immigration officials.
Exactly. But if I remember correctly, most universities didn't really go for that.
No, they didn't. And there's a good reason for that.
Why is that?
Well, sanctuary campus sounds powerful, but legally speaking,
Yeah.
it doesn't really mean much. Universities, even private ones, are still under federal law.
Right.
So declaring themselves sanctuaries wouldn't actually change anything.
Oh, I see.
In fact, it might even make them a bigger target for the feds.
So it was more about the symbolism than any real legal protection.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Universities are kind of like guests in the federal government's house.
Okay.
They can politely ask for things, but they can't start changing the rules or rearranging the furniture.
Gotcha. So even if they could become full-blown sanctuaries, they could still do something to protect their students, right?
Well,
The article quotes Patricia McGuire, the president of Trinity Washington University.
oh, yeah.
She said that universities have to speak up for their immigrant students to make the community of support meaningful.
And she's absolutely right. That quote really captures the whole dilemma.
Yeah.
They feel this responsibility to protect these students,
Yeah.
but their hands are often tied.
Right.
It's a tough spot.
It makes you wonder where the line is,
Yeah.
between just providing education and actually advocating for their well-being in society as a whole.
Right.
What do you think, listener? Where do you think a university's responsibility begins and ends?
It's a big question.
It is.
And it goes beyond just universities, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a reflection of a much bigger conversation we're having as a country
Sure.
about immigration, inclusion, what it really means to be American.
Right. And since we're talking big picture, I remember back in 2016, there was all this talk about sanctuary cities.
Right.
Cities that were like limiting their cooperation with federal immigration enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Did that idea ever gain any traction in higher education?
It did, but not quite in the same way. There was definitely a push for sanctuary campuses back then, especially from student activists.
Right.
They wanted universities to adopt that label.
To create these protected spaces?
Exactly. Places where undocumented students would be safe from immigration enforcement.
But like we talked about earlier, most universities weren't really into that.
Right.
So was that just a legal thing, or were there other reasons too?
Well, the legal side was definitely a big part of it. Remember, even private universities, they still have to follow federal law.
Right.
Declaring themselves sanctuaries would basically be like saying, we're not going to listen.
Yeah.
Which could lead to all sorts of legal trouble. And even the loss of federal funding, which most universities can't afford.
So it was more symbolic than practical.
Pretty much. The label might have sounded good,
Right.
but it wouldn't have actually offered any real legal protection.
And it might have even backfired.
Exactly. It could have made them a bigger target.
Wow, so universities are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, they are.
If they speak out too much, they risk becoming political targets.
Right.
But if they stay silent,
Then they risk abandoning their students.
it's a tough spot.
No doubt. It's a very delicate balancing act.
It is. But even though they didn't go for the sanctuary label,
Right.
a lot of universities did implement things to help their undocumented students.
Right. Absolutely.
Like what kind of things?
Well, for one, many of them set up special centers just for undocumented students.
Okay.
Offering things like legal aid, counseling, academic support.
That's great.
Yeah. And they made sure to train their faculty and staff on how to best support these students.
So it was about creating a supportive environment within the university,
Exactly.
even if they couldn't offer full-blown legal protection.
Precisely. It was all about making sure these students felt seen, heard, and supported.
I like that.
And this wasn't just happening in liberal areas,
Yeah.
Even in states with stricter immigration policies, a lot of universities were finding ways to help their undocumented students.
That's heartening to hear.
It is.
It suggests that despite all the political division,
Yeah,
there's still a shared understanding that everyone deserves access to education.
I agree. And it's important to remember that these efforts weren't just out of pure altruism.
Oh, right.
Universities also recognize the contributions these students make
Yeah.
to their campuses and to society as a whole.
You know, one thing that really strikes me about all this is the courage of these students.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're facing so much fear and uncertainty, and yet they're still determined to get an education and build a better life for themselves and their families.
It's incredibly inspiring. They're up against a system that often feels rigged against them,
Yeah.
and yet they keep pushing forward.
Their persistence is amazing.
It speaks volumes about their character and their drive.
It makes you wonder how their experiences might shape their perspectives
Right.
and what they'll contribute to the world in the future.
It's hard to imagine going through something like that and not coming out stronger.
I know, right?
They've faced adversity head on, had to fight for their right to be here, to learn. It's bound to shape them.
Absolutely. And I bet it creates a strong sense of empathy
For sure.
and a commitment to social justice.
Definitely. You see a lot of undocumented students becoming advocates,
Yeah.
not just for themselves.
But for others,
Exactly. Working to change the systems that have marginalized them.
it really highlights the idea that sometimes the most powerful voices come from those who have experienced injustice firsthand.
I couldn't agree more.
Right.
And it's a testament to what education can do, how it can empower people to make a real difference.
You know, the article ends on a kind of hopeful note.
Oh, yeah.
It points out that a lot of universities are actually better equipped to support these students now than they were back in 2016.
Interesting.
They've learned from what happened before, built up their resources, and created networks to share information and best practices.
That's huge. It shows that despite all the challenges, progress is happening.
Yeah,
Universities are becoming more responsive to their undocumented students
it's a good sign.
and more proactive in creating supportive environments.
It's like even when things feel politically bleak,
Yeah.
institutions can still adapt and change for the better.
And it's a testament to all the people who have pushed for that change, you know?
Yeah.
Student activists, faculty members, staff.
It's a reminder that even small actions can make a difference over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that we all need to stay engaged and keep advocating for what we believe in.
Well said. You know, this whole conversation is making me think about that déjà vu feeling we talked about at the beginning.
Oh, how so?
There are definitely similarities to 2016, but something feels different this time around.
I agree. It's not just a repeat of the past. Things have shifted in some important ways.
So it's like déjà vu, but with an upgrade.
I like it.
What exactly has changed in those 8 years?
Well, for starters, a lot of universities have really stepped up their game when it comes to supporting undocumented students.
Like how?
Well, they've built these dedicated centers,
All right.
brought in specialized staff, and created policies specifically designed to address the challenges these students face.
So they're coming into this fight with more experience and better resources than they had before.
Exactly. And that preparedness is key. It means that even if things change at the federal or state level, universities are in a much stronger position to protect their students.
That's a relief to hear.
It is.
And it makes me think about all the work that's been done, the activism, the advocacy.
Right.
It's good to know those efforts weren't wasted.
Absolutely. It shows that progress is possible, even when things look tough politically.
Yeah.
It might take time, but consistent effort can make a real difference.
And sometimes the biggest changes start small, right?
Exactly.
Within individual communities and institutions.
That's why it's so important for everyone to stay informed, stay involved,
Yeah.
and use their voice to advocate for what's right.
Whether it's supporting organizations, contacting your representatives, or
Yeah.
just having honest conversations about these issues.
We can all contribute to creating a more just world.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
I started out feeling pretty worried, but now I'm feeling more hopeful.
That's good.
I'm inspired by these students' resilience
It's remarkable.
and by the people who are fighting for them.
It's a tough fight, but a worthy one.
Absolutely.
It's a complex issue, for sure.
It is.
And like we've discussed, there aren't any easy answers. But the stakes are high.
Oh, yeah.
The decisions made by lawmakers, university leaders, and everyday people on these campuses will have a big impact on these students' lives.
It's a reminder that even if this issue doesn't affect us directly,
Right.
it should still matter to us.
Absolutely.
We're talking about these young people's futures, and in a way, the future of our society.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay.
What can you do within your own community to support undocumented students and create a more just world?
It's a question we should all ask ourselves.
I agree.
And with that, we encourage you, listener,
Yes.
to think about how you can help make your community more welcoming and supportive for undocumented students.
It could be a small act of kindness, a word of encouragement, or just taking the time to listen and learn.
Even those small actions can have a big impact.
Exactly. Let's work together to build a more inclusive world for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.
See you then. Exactly. It's like they can ask for things,
Right.
but they can't, start redecorating.
Okay, that makes sense. But even if they couldn't become full-on sanctuaries, surely there's something they could do to help their students.
Wow.
I mean, the article mentions Patricia McGuire,
Oh, yeah?
the president of Trinity Washington University. She said universities have to speak up for their immigrant students
Right.
to make that support really meaningful.
She's right. That really highlights the dilemma they face, this
Yeah.
responsibility to protect these students.
Right.
But they're limited in what they can actually do.
It's a tough spot. It makes you wonder where that line is, between just providing education
Right.
and actually advocating for their well-being out in the real world.
It's a tough one. And it's not just a question for universities, is it?
No, it's bigger than that.
It's a reflection of a much larger conversation
Right.
about immigration, inclusion, what it truly means to be American these days.
Absolutely. And speaking of the bigger picture,
Yeah.
I remember back in 2016, all that talk about sanctuary cities.
Oh, yeah.
Cities that were basically refusing to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement.
Right, limiting their cooperation.
Did that concept ever catch on in higher education?
It did, but not the same way. There was a push for sanctuary campuses back then.
Okay.
A lot of student activists were really pushing for it.
Right.
The idea was to create these safe spaces on campuses where undocumented students wouldn't have to worry about IC.
But, like we said before, most universities didn't actually go for it.
Right.
Was that purely a legal concern?
Legality was a big part of it.
Okay.
Even private universities have to answer to federal law.
Right.
Declaring themselves sanctuaries would be a direct act of defiance, which could mean legal challenges, loss of funding, things most universities can't risk.
So it was more symbolic than practical.
Yeah, pretty much. The label might have sounded powerful,
Right.
but it wouldn't have provided any real legal protection.
And it might have even made them a bigger target.
Exactly. That's the risk they were facing.
Wow, so universities were in a tough spot.
No doubt about it.
If they spoke out too strongly, they could become political targets.
Right.
But if they stayed silent,
It would feel like they were abandoning their students.
a real dilemma. It's a delicate balance.
It is. But even though they didn't embrace the sanctuary label, many universities did take steps to support their undocumented students.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, a lot of them created dedicated centers,
Okay.
specifically for undocumented students,
Oh, cool.
offering things like legal aid, counseling, academic support.
And they were trying to create a supportive environment.
Exactly. Even if they couldn't offer full legal protection,
Right.
it was about making sure those students felt seen and supported.
I like that. And was this just happening in more liberal areas?
It's interesting. This was happening even in states with tougher immigration policies.
Wow.
Even there, universities were finding ways to help.
That's really encouraging to hear.
It really is.
It shows that beneath all the political stuff,
Yeah,
there's still this understanding that education should be accessible to everyone.
I agree. And it's worth noting, these efforts weren't entirely altruistic.
Oh, right.
Universities recognize that these students make valuable contributions to their campuses, to society.
It's true. Throughout all of this,
Yeah.
what really stands out to me is the courage of these students.
Their resilience is incredible.
It is. They're facing so much uncertainty, fear even,
Yeah.
and yet they're still pushing forward with their education,
The conspiring.
determined to build a better future.
For themselves, for their families.
It's pretty amazing. It makes you think about how these experiences might shape them,
Right.
what kind of impact it'll have on their lives.
It's hard to imagine going through something like that and not coming out changed.
Stronger, even.
I think so. It forces you to confront adversity head on, to fight for your right to be here,
Yeah,
to learn. It's bound to leave a mark.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I imagine it also fosters a lot of empathy,
Definitely.
a commitment to social justice.
For sure. A lot of undocumented students become advocates,
Yeah.
not just for themselves.
But for others in similar situations.
Exactly. They're working to change the systems that have held them back.
It's like that saying,
What's that?
sometimes the most powerful voices come from those who have experienced injustice firsthand.
Couldn't agree more. It's a testament to the power of education, how it can empower people to make a real difference.
You know, the article actually ends on a hopeful note.
Oh, that's good to hear.
It says many universities are better equipped to support these students now than they were back in 2016.
Interesting.
They've learned from their past experiences,
Yeah.
built up their resources, created networks to share information.
That's huge. It means that progress is being made, even when things feel politically uncertain.
It's good to hear that universities are becoming more responsive,
Definitely.
more proactive.
And it's a testament to all the people who've been pushing for change.
Yeah.
Student activists, faculty, staff.
It's a good reminder
What's that?
that even when things feel overwhelming, even small actions can have a big impact.
And that we all need to keep fighting for what's right.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah.
You know, this whole conversation,
Yeah.
it's making me think back to that deja vu feeling we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
There are definitely similarities to 2016, but something feels different this time around.
I agree. It's not just a simple repeat of the past.
Like things have actually shifted in some significant ways.
That's true. The landscape has changed.
It's like deja vu, but better, right?
Yeah, I like that.
So what exactly has changed? You know, what's different now compared to 8 years ago?
Well, for one thing, a lot of universities have gotten a lot better at supporting their undocumented students.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, like we talked about before, they've created these dedicated centers, brought in staff who really understand the issues, and they've developed policies specifically for undocumented students.
So they're not starting from scratch this time.
Exactly. They're way more prepared.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, it means that even if the laws change, at the federal level or state level,
Right.
universities are in a much better position to help their students.
It makes me think about all the work that's been done,
Yeah.
all the activism, the advocacy.
It wasn't for nothing.
It's good to know that it's actually made a difference.
Yeah, it's proof that progress is possible.
Even when things feel really tough politically.
It might not happen overnight, but if you keep pushing, things can change.
And sometimes the biggest changes start at the local level, right?
Absolutely.
Like within individual communities and institutions.
That's why it's so important to stay informed and get involved.
Yeah.
Use your voice to advocate for what's right.
Whether that's supporting organizations, contacting your representatives, or just having honest conversations with people about these issues.
We can all do our part to create a more just world.
This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. I gotta say, I started out feeling pretty anxious, but now I'm feeling a bit more optimistic.
That's good.
Seeing how resilient these students are and seeing all the people fighting for them, it's really inspiring.
Yeah, it's a tough fight, no doubt, but it's definitely a worthy one.
It really is.
It's a really complex issue with no easy answers.
Are you sure?
But the stakes are incredibly high. The decisions made by politicians, university leaders, even just regular people on these campuses,
Yeah.
they'll have a huge impact on these students' lives.
It's a reminder that even if this issue doesn't affect us directly,
Right.
we should still care about it.
Absolutely.
It's about these young people's futures. And in a lot of ways, it's about the future of our society as a whole.
Well said. As we wrap up here, I want to leave you with one last question.
Okay.
What can you do in your own community to support undocumented students? How can you help create a more just world for them?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves. And on that note, listener, we encourage you to think about how you can help make your community more welcoming for undocumented students.
It could be a small act of kindness, a word of encouragement, or even just taking the time to listen and learn from their experiences.
Remember, even small actions can make a difference.
Absolutely. Let's work together to create a world where everyone feels welcome and supported.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.